newspapers this morning with this headline from the Nigerian News Direct. How Nigeria's debt service to revenue ratio dropped to 65% in 17 months. More on that from page 13, and that statement is attributed to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. We move on now to the Nigerian Tribune. Security agencies involved in miners' arrest, prosecution to face probe. More on that from page 3, and that's coming as President Tinubu directs the release of the young detainees and asking the humanitarian ministry to take charge of their welfare. We move on now to the Guardian newspaper, and it's taking a look at world politics. World leaders and nations anxious as the United States decides Harris-Trump's fate. More on that from page 6 of the Guardian this morning. The Daily Times kicks off with Tinubu ordering the release of miners involved in the End Bad Governance protest. You can get more of that from page 2 of the Daily Times. The Daily Trust is leading with Falana seeking compensation as Tinubu directs release of miners. The biggest story today in all of the papers, apparently. President orders investigation and prosecution of officers behind that action. The Bauchi State Governor states that the arrest was inhuman to begin with, and the Attorney General of the Federation to take over and discontinue the case today. More on that from the Daily Trust newspaper. And the Blueprint is leading with Tinubu directing the welfare of the NBAC governance juvenile protesters. Despite hardship, we've crashed debt servicing profile from 97 to 65%, according to the federal government. On the bottom plate of the New Telegraph, we have no going back on subsidy and forex reforms, according to the Minister of Finance, Mr. Wale Edun. More on that from pages 5, 7, and 28 of the New Telegraph this morning. The Vanguard. And bad governance. Tinubu orders the Attorney General of the Federation to free miners facing trial. Meanwhile, the All Progressives Congress is kicking as Atiku tags Tinubu's economic policy prescriptions shambolic. More on that from the Vanguard this morning. Business Day. How Trump or Harris's win will shape Nigerian markets. One to look out for. Banks, 1.2 trillion loans at risk on inflation and interest rates. More on that from the Business Day. And this Nigeria, release the kids now. That is one of the headlines we're seeing in almost every newspaper today. And the president is speaking to new ministers. You'll be criticized, abused, but be focused. I've stopped scavengers of nation's resources. That is from the This Nigeria newspaper this morning. And those are the headlines from the newspapers this morning.
And so you see some of those dailies there, some of them, just for me, the ones that stand out for me, again, it's from the Vanguard. And it's one of those tiny ones that you hardly see. The Vanguard newspaper, above the nameplate, the president to the ministers, telling them, you will be criticized, abused, but be focused. That story continues on page 9. The question I would ask, and many will ask, is focused on what? On the task at hand, on their deliverables. How much are they doing in terms of deliverables? What are they going to be delivering? What's the timeline? It's one of the things that some will say is a problem in leadership in Nigeria. Timelines are not clearly stated. Okay, we're going to go here, and this is a time frame within which this will be done. So is the president giving them timelines on the things that they're going to deliver on so that they can pass that on to, as some will say, they are only superintending over a team that is doing the work, and those are the civil servants. They are the ones running the machinery of the different ministries. So the minister is only just supervising what they are doing. So what's the timeline he has so that he can pass it on to the team and say, hey team, the president has mandated us to deliver on this within 6 months, within 1 year. So you have 2 months, you have 3 months to deliver on this. So that's one of the things that stand out. Of course, you saw the story about the End Bad Governance protest and the president's directive to the Attorney General of the Federation. But you see the reaction of a human rights lawyer. Terminating treason charge against minors is not enough. That's coming from Femi Falana. He said it's not enough to just terminate the treason charge against the minors. There are other things that need to be done. And so we go to page 5 to get more on that story, but I'll leave it there for the Vanguard.
I'm looking at the leadership newspaper this morning, we were hit with this very sad story yesterday. Page 7 of the Leadership newspaper actually has all the details there. But the EFCC arresting Okowa over the alleged 1.3 trillion naira fraud. Page 7 has more on that story. And it also brings me to this headline here that I'm seeing also from the Leadership newspaper, the Sultan of Sokoto saying God will handle bad leaders. But we'll call them out so that God can see them very clearly. We have to be able to have some kind of hand in this. It is embarrassing, the kind of situations that we have to go through. But my major take today is on the U.S. elections. In fact, the Leadership is taking a very interesting view this morning, how an election 10,000 kilometers away concerns Nigeria and Africa. And they're looking at a lot of things, where the candidates stand, what global markets are saying, where the immigrants are standing, what it's going to be one of the tightest polls, the mood in the world capitals. Everyone is waiting with bated breaths, really, because, you know, when America sneezes, a lot of us catch cold. So we need to understand what's going on and how this election is going to impact their foreign policy, which will, in other words, affect us as a people. Remember, we do a lot of business with that country, and we have a lot of things that we depend on the United States for. So we're watching to see how all of that pans out. But it is election day in the United States. The United States decides a make or mar presidential poll. Harris versus Trump. Where do you stand? What are your thoughts? You can talk to us on YouTube. You can send us messages. We'd like to hear what your stand is on this election and what you think is going to be the benefit to the Nigerian people, depending on who wins that election. But this story, page 4 of the Leadership newspaper, that's where we're looking at it from today.
Let me just take this last one here from Daily Trust, and it ties into what Kayla, you said here. Let's call them out so that God can see them clearly. Well, the Sultan's advising against that. His Eminence Abu Bakr III is saying, stop castigating leaders, allow God to deal with them. That's just below the nameplate of Daily Trust there. It says, stop castigating leaders, allow God to deal with them. Question is, you need to be able to differentiate between castigating and calling them out so that God will see them clearly and deal with them. So maybe you're aligning with the Sultan here. You're working together to make sure that they are seen, and then
we have to help in the war. From time to time, we have to bring out them so that our general God would help us to act fast.
If you get to page 7 will give you more on that story. But what I mentioned earlier from Vanguard newspaper, what the human rights lawyer and senior advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana, was talking about, says detention. Falana seeks compensation as Tinubu directs release of minors. So he's asking that don't just drop the charges, the treason charges against them, compensate them. Compensate them. And so I hope all of this will not just be swept under the carpet because the president has given the directive. This whole process, whether discharge and acquit or whether you're going to prosecute some of them, whatever it is you're going to do, it needs to be followed through and through. But as we always say here, communicate, let the people know what's going on. It doesn't reduce your power as a leader. Go to page 4, you get more details on that. And that's it from Daily Trust, and a look at what the headlines are on some of the dailies. Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment to pick up our conversations. Don't go there.